Well, today guys, we're going to be talking about 5 ways to make drop D sound heavy again. So what is going on, guys? Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. Yes, we're talking about a guitar tuning that was once heavy but is now in 2019 not really used that much. So what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to go over 5 quick tips on how to make drop D sound heavy again, and then we'll go into Logic and we'll pull up a project that I've been working on in drop D and show you guys how I made it sound heavy. So starting off with number 1, sound like Mark Martin and Willie Adler. Well, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. All kidding aside, guys, starting off with number 1 is you're allowed to have a lot more low end. Now, I'm kind of relatively notorious for saying cut out as much low end as you want and as you can get away with your guitar tracks, but when you're in drop D, you're not really hitting the lower registers with the lower tunings, and therefore you can boost up your lows either on your amp or on your plugin or in post EQ. We'll get to that in a second. Number 2 is have more gain. If you have more gain, it sounds deceptively a little bit more rowdy, and depending on what you're trying to convey to the listener, if you want to have it to sound heavier and aggressive, if you will, you can get away with having more gain. You might lose a little bit of precision in terms of note clarity or what have you, but when you have a saturated, huge, rowdy, aggressive guitar tone, it sounds heavier. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. Number 3 requires a little bit of music theory. Whoa, 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 don't click away. I know, metal music theory does not compute. I get it, but just stick with me. So guys, for this example, we're talking about dissonance, alright? Dissonance, in layman's terms, is just one half step away from another note played simultaneously, alright? For this example, on my Gibson Les Paul Custom, on the E string and the B string, I'm on the E, I'm on the 12, and on the B, on the 17. It's the same exact note, right? If I just take that B string with that E, if you will, and just move it down to the 16th fret, one half step, creates that real, like, I call it like horror movie kind of sound, spooky sound. And if you're playing that along with some heavy chugs, all of a sudden, what was just kind of like a normal sounding riff, if you will, sounds like evil and scary, and it just makes it sound heavier, just like that. Number 4, guys, is a bit of an ego check for the guitar player, and that is let the bass guitar do its job. The guitar, I've said a million times, is a mid-range focused instrument, 1, and when you're in drop D, 2, it's not going to be holding down the low end even more so. It's just the nature of the tuning. But when you have a nice pronounced, in-your-face aggressive bass tone, all of a sudden that drop D riff with a huge bass tone hitting that lower octave than the normal D on your guitar just makes the guitar sound huge, basically. And lastly, guys, number 5 is 4-track guitars, quad tracking. Now, honestly, guys, I've never really been a fan of just having one guitar left, one guitar right. I've always thought the guitar sounds thin, and I'm very envious of people who can make a guitar sound huge with just 2 tracks. I've always been doing quad tracks, but in drop D, sometimes I'll even get away with doing like 6 tracks or 8 tracks even. No joke, the more tracks, the better. With high gain, in-your-face tones, the more tracks equals more gain equals more heavy saturated sounds, and just makes it sound that much better. Alright guys, so now we are in the Logic project that I have called Make Drop D Great Again. It's nothing to really be proud about. It's just an 8-bar loop, you know, not really anything intricate with my writing process here. But what I have is quad track guitars, a lot of gain, a lot of low end in the guitars, an in-your-face bass tone, and dissonant sounds in the background. Alright, so I'm going to play you the loop right now. Alright, so that's just, just a constant loop of chugs, but let's dive into it real quick, alright? So for the guitar tones, I used the Howard Benson STL Tonality plugin, and I used the Swedish Death Metal preset for 2 of the tracks, and look at the bass on this plugin, and look at the gain. I mean, the gain's at basically 10, bass is at 8, right? This works well for drop D for me, because it has all those things I was talking about. It has a lot of gain and a lot of bass, so when the drop D guitar isn't exactly, bass heavy and just, in your face in terms of the low end, this plugin in particular does that job. I had another 2 tracks here that have a different setting. It has the major riffage, and the bass isn't really there, and the gain is kind of there, but that's just basically to segue into my other point about having quad track guitars. I'll turn down these two guitars, and then I'll put them back in the mix, and you'll just see the difference of having 2 tracks versus 4 tracks. Alright, so it's subtle there, but if you guys are listening with like studio headphones or studio monitors, what have you, it makes it more of a surround sound 3D effect with the guitars, and you're hitting more spaces sonically in your guitar tracks, right? So that brings us to our dissonance, alright? We talked about our gain, and we talked about our low end, and we talked about quad tracks, right? Let's talk about the dissonance with the guitar tracks, alright? I'll solo these. I don't ever recommend mixing in solo, you guys know that. But all I'm doing here is 14 and 18 E and B on this track, just back and forth, and just 2 takes of that. So this is what this sounds like. So for this, I'm using the STL tonality Screaming Lead Old England preset for both of those tracks, and yeah, it sounds wrong. It sounds like nasty, right? It sounds broken, and it sounds disgusting, but when you throw it in to the overall, context of the song, it sounds scary, evil, whatever you want to call it, and I love it so much. Oh, I love it. And lastly, guys, we'll talk about the bass tones. Now, for the bass tones, I have 2 separate tracks. There's the same exact track, just one's altered slightly. The deep bass, as I called it, is completely clean using my Sans Amp bass driver DI Box V2. But the clank bass, guys, I found an incredible use for the Tone Forge Mr. Mansour plugin, and that is just to make my bass sound absolutely disgusting. Alright, so I'm going to play the 2 bass tracks together for you. So just hear how nasty and not brittle, but harsh, and just again kind of like the lead sound, how broken it sounds. When you have that distorted bass doing the exact same thing that the distorted guitar is doing, it almost deceives the listener and thinks that heavy sound is coming from the bass, from the actual guitar and not from the bass guitar, when in reality that's not the case, you know what I mean? So having a pronounced in-your-face bass tone blended in, kind of doing almost the exact same thing sonically as your guitars, it makes it come into here's the guitar and here's the bass guitar. They come together and they sound like one giant wall of sound, even though they're 2 separate instruments altogether. So guys, those are my 5 tips on how to make drop D better. I hope you guys dug this. I'm going to play this track one more time, and then we're going to get out of here. Alright guys, I hope you guys learned something. I love drop D. It's probably my favorite tuning behind drop B. But yeah, you don't really need to drop down to drop Z, if you will. Drop D just holds it down just fine. And if you guys do these tips, maybe you'll get something cool out of drop D. I hope you guys liked this video. Like and share it if you enjoyed it. As always, my dudes, stay metal, and I'll see you guys next time.